had another question here.
So what I've been seeing a lot is what I termed accidental agile. So meaning that they started off doing waterfall and they had decision changes or they had scope creep, and then by the end of the project they said, oh, we did it agile, and we were doing it great. So I guess I have mixed feelings, because on the one hand I'm happy that they're doing agile, or that they're excited to do agile, but they're not really doing agile. So how do you get over that, I guess, to maybe educate up that you're not really, you could be doing a lot better,
Yeah, you might be able to talk about that more. Since I'm the up. It's hard for me to talk about how I educate up, although there are some educating up that I have to do when I'm talking to folks above me or funding sources and that kind of thing, but internally.
Yeah, I've seen that a lot too, that people use Agile as a catch-all for when perhaps their planning wasn't quite as good as it should have been. So from that perspective, you have to be able to put some kind of structure around Agile, right? It's not just go forth and do whatever you feel like doing and give it to me in 10 weeks. And so really that's, I think, the way that you would educate up, is give people that understanding of Agile as a methodology. It's not carte blanche. It really is a methodology. And as such, it has certain tenets. And there should be a goal and a target at the end of every scrum. And it should be something viable, right? And so, you may not get your Maserati at the end of the first scrum, but maybe you'll get the skateboard, But I should be able to use that skateboard. And that's kind of the envisioning, I think, that you should use as you teach up.
I do think there are some constraints that we as managers can apply to these situations that can help differentiate between chaos and discipline development. And I think that Sumi's example of the demos, being able to demonstrate something. So the question is, what did you show me? Show me something. If you're showing me something, my confidence goes way up. If it's you just stumbled across the finish line after 10 weeks, not so much. You got lucky. The other thing that I expect to see is deadlines. I don't like to hear the conversation about, oh, Agile doesn't have deadlines, for example. That to me is a red flag of a team that's trying to get out of something. There are deadlines all over the place in Agile projects. They're everywhere in Agile projects. And so I want teams to be taking advantage of deadlines, not trying to get away from deadlines. So that's another constraint as a manager, where I can say, you do have a deadline. That part is non-negotiable. The scope, very negotiable. The deadline, not so much. So it's those sorts of boundaries that we put on the sandbox. What you do in there, you've got lots of options, but there are definitely boundaries on the sandbox. So I saw a question. I'm going to go over here, and then I'll come back to you.
So I'm relatively new to the state, and in an Agile environment, it was always function was first, and if you got 80% of your functionality, it was still considered successful. In the state, 80% isn't considered a successful project. So that sandbox, the boundaries are more constricting, and so breaking it down into the skateboard and to the scooter, to the motorcycle, and to the Maserati, how do you match that with your procurements, with a peer, with all of that good stuff, and still reflect success because it's doing what you need it to do, even though it may not be the Maserati at the end that you had to write your procurement for?
I think as a state, we're still figuring some of that out. But my initial response will be that you need to define your scope of your scrum to include what you can get done within those state guidelines and boundaries. If you know that you're going to require a procurement to meet the functionality in your scrum, then include that as part of your scrum timeline, and that becomes part of the work of your scrum, right? And you're working in a matrix team, so we're not just talking developers. So you need to think about all of the pieces and parts that go into that, and create a scrum then that addresses enough that you've completed a piece of something that you can show and demonstrate. Even if that is just, a solid procurement with an executable contract.
The other thing that occurs to me, and I'm officially winging it here, but there is, I think, a little bit of a distinction here between maybe an adoption and a transformation. An adoption might be a team moving from waterfall to Scrum. It's fairly lightweight. You're not trying to work with a lot of the peripheral parties. A transformation can be where you're dealing with finance or the provisioning people. I'm sorry, I don't think I got that quite right, but the various outside parties. That to me is a transformation, which is a much more strategically oriented, big picture kind of effort that requires a lot more work and a lot more planning. And so I see that both in government and also, in the private sector when I'm out working with companies to do their transformations. Oftentimes I have to think about how finance has to change and how these other groups have to change. And so I think you handle those very, very differently. So I think we had a question. Yeah, I'm sorry. I promised you next.
Thank you. Okay, say that you have stakeholder engagement from the top up, and we actually have a deputy director who has offered a project as our pilot project for Agile, but we still have to get around the PAL process. How do you guys do that?
What did you call that?
I think the answer is you don't get around the PAL process.
Get around it by breaking it smaller budget chunks and fall under the
Yeah,
Okay, great.
that's what I,
Wow, the hands are sprouting up left and right. We've hit a nerve here. So I'm going to do the best I can here. So I heard one suggestion, which was to break it up into smaller chunks. Am I getting that right? Other thoughts? Are there other suggestions from the crowd here?
there's one in the back. Wait.
Yes. Go right ahead.
And currently, we work in a hybrid approach as far as doing iterative approach on Agile and waterfall methodologies. And one thing in a business analysis program class that we went through recently was educating, expanding beyond your business and not just to the management level. It's information from all the levels within that you work in as stakeholders. My challenge is because we're in a cross-functional area and we're siloed, as I classify it as, how do we get to reach all the parties, including internal and external, to get them all on board to the Agile approach and get them out of that waterfall mentality?
Tell me a little bit more about how you see yourself as being siloed in a cross-functional EPMO kind of environment.
Everything that we do internally is through a process. It's a set standard of process, and we have to follow that. So when we try and reach, say, somebody from the procurement side that works in a project with us on a change that we're doing, because this is, I think, the challenges in change management, and getting all the parties that play inside of change management to come aboard on the Agile methodology, from procurement processes to project management processes to even the analysis process. You had touched on a very critical part, because I am working on my doctorate. One of the things that I see that is volatile is requirements. And if we don't have that from all levels inside of the department, and only a piece was SAP in our group, we work totally with just our business operations. It has to go beyond that. So how do we reach in the other areas that are involved?
So from my perspective, at least, one of the things that we did was start from a perspective that all of those people have to be at the table with the EPMO. So we have, every 2 weeks, we have something we call, you can call it anything you like, really. It got called broad performance. And all of those entities are there with EPMO, going through all of the projects so that everybody's hearing the same thing, everybody's on board, everybody's contributing to all of those projects moving forward. And we, it's a fairly quickly run meeting in some respects, because once the projects are up and approved and agreed upon, then what we look at every 2 weeks is accomplishments. So who's made accomplishments? Let's celebrate some of those things. What are the pain points? Are you not getting assistance, for instance, from legal? They haven't given you a decision in terms of, something that they needed to opine on. Is procurement not move something forward? Where are the pain points to keeping this? Is something hitting kind of the red, yellow, green kind of cycle of saying, what do we need to do to intervene to keep this project on point? Or have we hit an immovable barrier? In some cases, we've run up against those, and then we've had to have the decision of moving that project back or rebaselining it a little bit. But everybody's at that table every 2 weeks, and I'm not talking just execs. We include all the key project managers right on down the line to the next level of staff, and they need to be at that table and be part of the discussion and part of the movement forward.
So that brings to mind the strategies that we use. Some of them are stakeholder-led, so they're executive-led or other key stakeholders, and they will oftentimes put together what I think of as a transformation team, and the transformation team is a cross-functional team like you were describing. That's one approach. There is another fundamental approach that I've seen, which is what I think of as a grassroots approach, which is the developers start doing it without asking. I mean, what's up with that? So they go out and they start doing Agile, they form teams, and they start doing Scrum, and they don't ask anybody for permission, right? And I've been involved in those as well, and those can take off like wildfire, okay? But they have their challenges too. So just like the top-down ones have the challenge of trying to get engagement, trying to get people to buy in, sort of saying this is the way we're going, the grassroots have the challenge of getting the executives on board, of getting the business engaged. It goes back to our theme, which is connecting the technology and the business. Those grassroots adoptions now have to convince the business that this Agile stuff's worth doing. So, it kind of goes, I've seen both. Someone had a question back here. Yeah. Okay.
It's not just a question, it's more of a comment and some kind of clarification. I'm a new manager under Sumi and Alisha. So I see what they're doing is very different than what I've seen in the past with state government. I've been involved in meetings, and I think what you said, just go as a passive listener, right? So I go there, attend the meetings that execs have and all these managers. And slowly you get into that mindset of Agile. You hear again and again and again, and you pass it on to your staff. So it's change leading from the top. We are not pushing it up. It's coming from, we have a strong sponsor, like Sumi said. So that's helpful. That's one, really good way to go. Any organization change management that you want to adopt, it has to lead from top, and that's really, it's been a positive experience. I was a part of Resistance also. Not that I don't like Agile, it's just not sure where are we going, but the more meetings I attended, the more discussions I was part of, it helps. You start seeing the big picture of, it's still staff is there which are still slow to adopt, but once you have line managers and supervisors also know all execs have your backing, it helps. That's one comment. Second, about what Liz asked, what their about a skateboard. So we are doing a project right now, and that's also, so we have, if we would have done the traditional waterfall methodology, I'm talking about the kiosk, if we would have done the traditional waterfall methodology, we would had to wait until all procurement, we know where we are going. But what we did was divided our project into multiple phases, and we started talking to business saying that, okay, we are giving you a skateboard first. And so procurement-wise also, we just said, okay, what do we need for this phase? And kept included business, even though we haven't even clarified full requirements, we know the big picture, business knows it, and we told them it may change when we start implementing. But that culture change, I can see that it's happening, and we haven't implemented it, but it's a really positive culture change to start including business upfront, include all technology folks, and no matter resistance, show them the small skateboard picture only, not show them the end result yet. We keep telling them that, yeah, it will come.
Right, so, sorry, not to respond to this directly. I think, so business has been very involved, and the struggle is more with demonstrating success to a control agency through a peer or through a procurement. Like, how do you write your procurement in an agile fashion? So even though we have the phases broke out and we know where the skateboard is, we know where the motorcycle is, we know where the car is, I probably skipped the scooter, I think. Even though we know where all of that is and we can demonstrate it, writing the procurement that is for a 3-year agile process, knowing that there are phases, but knowing what we need to demonstrate from a peer perspective at the end when everything is said and done is much different. And everybody is on board. Everybody wants to do it. I don't have the change management struggle that apparently is a big problem, but I mean, we're a relatively small entity. So my dissonance is with being able to demonstrate success at the end of everything, once it's done, once it's purchased, and once we've completed all of those phases, because we're trying to scope something that's a 3-year effort that involves a lot of different departments. And we don't want to fail at that. You know, we don't want to be perceived as a failure, even though we know where the success targets are.
Thank you. Anything to add to that, guys?
Well, I was just going to say that, the peer really should be identifying how you've met what your targets and your goals are, right? And regardless of what methodology you use to get there, you should still have those targets. So you need to still know what you're intending to accomplish. In fact, maybe even more so as you get into this, Scrum model.
We have another question in the back here.
Actually, I have a comment and a question. I work for the Department of Corrections, where we implemented SAP about 8 years ago. So we're in the post-production support phase. But I think, what we've learned there is we now use a bimodal approach. We were strictly waterfall initially, but we've progressed. And we're fortunate in that we have management that actually pushed the Agile approach on us, and we became certified Scrum Masters. But I think my question is, not every project fits into that Agile mode. I mean, we do more of a bimodal in some instances, but we're trying to utilize Agile as much as possible. And what we found is, as the gentleman here spoke to, we would break a larger initiative down into phases so that we could deliver what we call the low-hanging fruit. We could get the smaller successes that then built confidence in our stakeholders and end users. But do you agree that not every project is a good fit for an Agile approach, or do you think there's a way to break every project down into Agile?
Well, I guess what I would say is, there is no one solution for everything. And the more we try and do that, I think then we end up going this route, and then we're all going to have to change to the next route, whatever. But I do think there are principles of Agile that, for me, I don't care if I go back to my years as a ballerina. So, we work together in smaller groups to put together a choreography. So that concept of Agile for me has always, been the right way to do business. It's like and even going back to the example that we had over here, and I think a little bit about what you were saying is, you vision where you want to go. So you vision the big picture and you've got your phases. I worry about getting too prescribed all the way to the end of the vision because things change. Oh my God, I can get finished phase 1 and I thought this is what phase 2 should be. And if I've already booked that in my procurement and I've already booked that in terms of the expectations, then how do I adjust that? And is it going to be seen as then a failure? And so acknowledging the fact that things change, and they're changing faster today than anything. I mean, we're constantly having lots of conversations in our department about the demand of millennials, because I'm serving parents, and who are the parents today? They're 21 to 35, they're millennials, and they're Gen Zs coming along behind, and their expectations about how I deliver services and how our systems interact with them is very different than where it's been. So, the staff that are developing these systems have to be thinking about the fact that we're not building for just today or what we haven't met already today. It's really, are we building for what's needed, 2 and 3 and 5 years down the road, and how are we visioning that when we haven't even gotten there, kind of thing. But, I think that you have to really look at each of those. Our business applications, some of the things that we've built inside the house to sustain business processes, I think those sometimes are not quite as Agile-oriented, but I think the concept of teams coming together, everybody who's invested in that project, those go across, whether you're doing it in a waterfall kind of process or any other kind of process. I think there are elements of that that really make the best sense, because if you're not involving everybody, you're missing something, and that missing part can just blow you up at the end.
I've been a hardcore Agilist for many years, and my religion, I'm afraid, has been tested. So there are projects out there that we've come across where they're working with coding on hardware, embedded software on hardware, things like that, where the turnaround times, the cycle times on that kind of work are months. And so trying to do sprints and do Scrum in that kind of a scenario is very, very challenging. It's not to say it can't be done, and I'll be right there, but it's very hard. And so if you had asked me 5 years ago if it was possible, if all projects could be Scrum projects, I would have said, oh, yes. But today, having seen what I've seen, I do think that there are some projects that are more difficult and more challenging than others. And we have to deal with the realities when we're doing transformation, that some teams may have legitimate, very difficult challenges in front of them that stand in the way of quickly going Agile. Some teams can do it just great, but I've met teams that really had legitimate reason why they couldn't. And so the whole concept of bimodal IT is a controversial one, but I have to confess that I've met these people. They're real, and it's hard. It's hard. You had a question.
Just to answer her, I have been doing Agile coach for some time. So Agile is a framework, and within that framework you have Scrum as a methodology, Kanban, which is another methodology, and then you have extreme programming and feature-driven development. So you pick one, right? What normally people hear are two things. One is Scrum and other is Kanban. We haven't talked about Kanban, but so there are certain activities like post-production operations job, or instead they call M&O. I'm new here, so or like he mentioned, teams which are doing hardware development, if they are dependent on something in China for the 2-week sprint is outdoor, they can't do that. So that's where they follow Kanban approach, where you do 100% of tasks, then you push it to the pull model. You pull that task to another lane, and then you start doing another task. So not everything can be Agile, and Agile is a framework. Scrum is a model which has sprints and everything else, right? So all they are talking about is Scrum, but operations like job, you can definitely do Kanban. So there are certain things in Agile which can be used for different teams.
Absolutely right. Thanks for that perspective. Were there any observations? I see.
Hi, my name is Nick. I'm from Department of Technology. I'm trying to bring a couple of these ideas together. Ma'am, you said one of the thought processes, especially with the new age individuals, the millennials that were coming into play, I'll count myself as one of those, is the concept that we're an age where we'll be able to replace things at a whim. Instead of keeping something for 10 plus years, you know what, the new thing comes out and I get an iPhone every single year, right? We all kind of look at that, though of course I'm an Android guy. That being said, I see Agile, the capability of adding a new requirement, the capability of adding a new feature set, and the ongoing essence presence of, hey, let's develop the next best thing, as being that niche that the millennials can then buy into, versus let's spend a ton of time in order to develop all the requirements, and it takes 3 years to develop that, and by that time the next best thing has already come around. So why am I implementing Windows XP when Windows 10 is sitting right here, right? So I kind of look at that as, how do we implement Agile? And I'm going to transition a little bit to the slide that you guys have up here, because one of the things that Jan, sitting to my left of me, was stating is exactly what's going on in our department, as well as one of the projects that I have, is how do we get that buy-in from those individuals? And we talked about it a little bit, but getting that feedback, one of the things that I saw was, we talked about all these different types of meetings, and one of the things that I get is the kickback of, we have so many meetings, I can't get anything done. So if you just let me go and work, then I'll get you what you need. And it's like, well, if you don't even know what we need in the first place, how can you work? And that buy-in back and forth. And on top of that, if we may address, the department itself says, we're Agile, and everybody's excited. Well, what does that mean? Do we actually implement a project to implement Agile? Is there a marketing scheme that you do? Do we have to do training? It's just because one person goes to a seminar.
It's a pyramid scheme.
It's a pyramid scheme. Okay. So I have 1,000 different kind of questions in order to implement this, but just because we say that we're Agile and we have one person who goes to a training, how do I change 600 people in a department, 1,800 people in a department? DMV, how big are you guys? Almost 1,000? 10,000. How do you change that on a grand scale?
So I'll take a whack at that real quick.
Sure.
One is what you're talking about in that case really is transformation, okay, which is a very, very strategic approach. And so that's something that I do a lot of with organizations. And you're right, when you walk into your existing waterfall organization, you know what? If you had no meetings on day one, it wouldn't be a big deal to run in and say, okay, we'll add a few Agile meetings. But that's just not the way it is. When you go into your typical organization, oftentimes they've got hundreds of meetings already. They're buried in meetings. And so when you walk in the room and say, oh yeah, I've got another one for you, of course everybody looks at you and goes, oh geez, thanks Tom, So I can totally relate to that. And so that meeting overload oftentimes is built into the culture. And so I do think it's one of the things that we have to address, and it's one of the things that will stand in the way of your adoption if you're not able to. So we need to find a way to have effective meetings, and effective meetings are very, very different than most of the meetings that we attend. So having said that, there are some things when we talk about aligning the business. Oftentimes what we've done is got really good at aligning the teams. So the teams have their little planning meetings and their demos and those sorts of things, and they're doing great. But how does that affect the rest of the business? The answer is it doesn't. They don't participate. And so we need to create a similar structure for the rest of the business where they start to align themselves according to a cadence, where they start to have conversations similar to what the teams are doing. So Agile stops oftentimes at the team level. And what we need to do is bring it to the rest of the business, which means we need to get them sprinting, we need to get them planning, we need to get them demoing, we need to be extending that conversation beyond the team. And that's part of what bringing a transformation like that is like. And I will stop there. Anything you guys want to add?
I was just going to address a little bit of your question around the meetings, and I completely agree with what Tom said. I used to work for a company where, I'm not kidding, people used to consider their status based on how many meetings they attended every day. I'm better than you because I went to 8 today. I mean, it was just crazy. So, but the other thing is that Agile is about communication. That's the whole point. Is that we're in partnership from a technology perspective. We're in partnership with the business. It's not, we're going to build it and we'll show it to you and you tell us if you like it, and so that requires communication. So just think of it as communication and not so much as meetings, and reform your meetings, make them different. Sometimes I'll just walk downstairs, even now, and I'll say, hey, do you have 5 minutes? Can you come out here? Just stand in the hallway. Oh, let's go grab him. Okay, let's just have a quick little, hey, we're going to do this, right? Okay, now everybody's gone. Okay, and that's all you need. You need the communication, you need the coordination. You don't need to sit in a meeting for an hour. It doesn't need to be on your calendar for an hour to make it successful. So just rethink that.
Yeah, and I attend way too many meetings, I can tell you that. But those that I calendar or that we calendar within the department, we try to be really, really focused and limit them to a specific amount of time. And the expectation I set is people need to come to the table knowing what they need to know and being prepared to have that conversation and move the decision-making along. I don't want to come to a meeting and everybody should have read kind of the project plan, and they didn't, and now we're going to be trying to read it in the meeting. That ain't going to work for me. We send out the stuff in advance and really try and make sure that decision-making. I do governance with the 58 counties. We open the lines for governance to the 58 counties. We send out all of the project plans and requests for change that are going to be discussed in the governance board, and I expect that they're going to ask questions and be on top of it. So people better be, one, prepared to answer those questions, but two, prepared to, be part of the decision-making process, because I don't want to hear later that that's not where you wanted to go, or you had issues with it. So really trying to make sure and set that from, a transparency, but moving it along in a way that, we can sit around and, discuss forever. But I'm a little OCD, so that makes me more than crazy.
We had another question in the back there.
Can you tell me who you think would make a good Scrum Master or that type of role? Should it be the technical lead, the application architect, the system owner, the project manager? Right now, it tends to be sort of the lead developer, but they don't have time because they're trying to keep their team moving. And so who do you see as the appropriate Scrum Master?
Mother Teresa. That's a really good question, and it's a tough role to fill, and I see a lot of the time what tends to happen is the default answer is, well, we'll take the project manager and we'll tap them on the head with a magic wand and poof, they're Scrum Master. And sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. What I think you're looking for is someone who is that overly cliched term, a servant leader. And so you want somebody who is going to be acting as full-time janitor for the team, making sure that, the person I think of, anybody here familiar with curling? The Canadian sport where they slide the rocks down the ice? Well, there are those guys with the sweepers, the guys with the brooms in front of the rock. That's the Scrum Master. They're clearing the ice, making the path, making sure that everything operates smoothly, slides effectively for the team. That, to me, is kind of the essence of what a good Scrum Master is. And they have to be terribly engaged, and they have to have really great social skills, which is why I'm no longer a Scrum Master.
You're not engaged, you have social skills.
I'll talk to you later.
Yeah, I think the facilitation is key, the ability to kind of move and network amongst various levels and get people engaged and bring them to the table. And it really can be anyone, but somebody needs to be appointed.
Yeah.
That's good. I'm taking my notes. Because the lead developer is really good at the technical stuff, but isn't necessarily a facilitator.
Right.
And so that,
I really want that to happen before we hand it off to the developer. Like, hand him off something, and he can really work with it and move it forward and do the coding and do the rest of it. But
To add to that, I've heard some controversy about whether or not the Scrum Master is a full-time role or it's a part-time role that's done by the dev manager, for example. And if you have somebody if your meetings are going to be really, really well run, the Scrum meetings, the planning meeting, the demo, those sorts of things, to run a meeting really, really well, as you were describing, Alisha, is not easy. It's a lot of work. And that is key to what you want your Scrum Master doing, making sure that whatever meetings the team is having are very effective. That means they have to be a fantastic facilitator. They also have to be working with all of these stakeholders to make sure they know what's going on. The product owners, the developers, the QA folks, they are trying to act as glue for the team. They're trying to build a team that's going through these storming, norming, and forming stages that we all know and love. So it is a very challenging role, and you never have a dull moment as a Scrum Master. Any other questions about Scrum Masters? Yes?
So we talked a lot about Agile and the department or agency moving in that direction. How are we dealing, or how well is that working with Department of Technology? So for instance, budgets and trying to be flexible with the budgets or the development and hitting your marks at that point. Because I know with Scrum, you're kind of chunking things out and such. Planning for a budget, planning for BCPs, and I mean, because a BCP in and of itself takes quite a while, and then making sure you're hitting those marks with your BCP. So how are you guys doing that, from a department perspective or from a project perspective?
Well, I would say that we are still working that through and developing it. So because we've shifted, and I'm relatively new to California, so there is a difference between the way that business is done on the East Coast and the way it's done here on the West Coast. So it's taken me a little bit of time to also appreciate and understand that. But I think that, the bottom line is that the way I tend to work is really business focused. And so, we're really taking this from a perspective of what do we need to do to improve our overall delivery of services to the customer at the front end. And so each of these things, as we've been developing and moving them forward, is really more about moving to that kind of goal than it was necessarily organized on the BCP or the project deliverable. So chunking it also, for me, using that term, makes more sense because it also helps us move in the right direction for the customer and the local staff engagement, quite frankly, because a lot of that change is really important as well. And so the technology supports the front offices, the county level staff really being able to do better work and to engage with their customers and meet their needs. So a lot of our work so far has not gotten us to the point where we needed to go. But with the new changes in the project delivery, in our meetings with agency and our control agency and OSI, we've come to an agreement kind of about at what point that might become a need for a BCP. At the moment, we haven't needed to move forward in that level. So most of this is being handled, all of this is being handled in smaller steps inside of our department, so that we have control over that. At some point, we will probably get to a point where, with the base system system that supports all of the counties, that we will need to envision something larger than that. But I don't see that probably for the next couple of years, because I also think that it's about that progressiveness, the lack of a good methodology, both at the county level and in the way the program was being run, is really something that we've talked about it here in a variety of different ways, needs to really be built over time. Small steps, repeated steps, constant steps. A lot of the time I've been out in the counties now visiting every single office with the exception of 10. I haven't made Siskiyou, Modoc, Inyo, and some of those out on that eastern slope. But I have done the rest of them, and my time is spent generally sitting down with our court partners there, but also sitting down with the staff one-on-one and really talking to them about what do they need and where do they need to go and what do we need to do to help them, so that my goal is really to make sure that whatever we're doing in the central office, that the 7,000 workers I have out in the counties are really able to work effectively and meet the needs of parents and families to do what they need to be doing. So that's the goal, and so building that, is just constant and progressive and moving forward for me.
So I think what I was looking at is more from a reporting standpoint from the Department of Technology.
Yeah, I was going to say that just because you're implementing an Agile methodology doesn't mean that you don't or you should not have good targets and good, right? You need to have goals, you need to have objectives, you need to have good timeframes. Tom was just talking about how there's, deadlines in Agile. All of that stuff still applies. It's just your methodology and how you're getting to that target, right? And you may not know exactly how you're going to develop a piece of functionality, but you know what the business goal is and what you're trying to achieve. And so as you're building your BCP, I think you can build it along those lines. I don't think that really changes too much. What's going to change is your project planning, where things are maybe not absolutely set in stone, as you move forward in your methodology. But from a big picture perspective, you should still know your overall estimated costs, your PYs, you should know all that stuff.
Yeah, and what I was thinking of is, when you're looking at your, depending upon the criticality of the project, being reported on, hitting those specific goals, because that can change, as you said, so much. And sometimes you might only be hitting, 80% of that functionality. But getting your report card to still say green or what have you as well, because you are hitting those goals, but those goals change based upon, what you've learned and where you are at that point.
That's very true. And, I was just actually watching a presentation from an Agile seminar in the UK recently, and the person who was giving the presentation made that same point, was that his project was Agile, so he was coming to the oversight committee, and he was saying things like, I'm kind of yellow now because I'm hitting 80%, or I need some decisions, and therefore, my scrum's changed, or maybe my functionality's changed, whereas everybody around him was doing waterfall, and they were still doing the, I'm green, until the day they were red, right? So, and so it's an education. And I think that we need to be honest. We go to the oversight, and we're honest about where are we in terms of the milestones and the deadlines that we had set for ourselves in this new methodology. But the understanding is that the risk is going to be smaller, and the risk might show up early, but I'm going to know it faster, and so that I can address it in time, so that it's not going to affect necessarily, it has a big enough impact on my end goal. I'm still going to be able to meet my end goal and be successful because I've addressed it up front.
Got another question over here.
Even before the oversight kicks in, we're going to go back to this stage gate PAL process, where you're going through these 4 stages that's basically waterfalling your entire project right up front, to where now you want to try to do Agile, but the Department of Technology has already locked you into a 4, 5, 10-year estimate just to get funding. So, is that going to change as we move forward, or?
Certainly hope so. I mean, I think we're starting to see some of that, but, I think that's the challenge no matter where you are, whether it's California or on the East Coast, that, that moving that element forward. And all of the history that many of us have had with failed projects has really not helped us in that arena. And I think that we've, got to try and figure out how to confront that kind of as a teaming. But I'm hopeful. I mean, at least what I've seen of late here in California is that, there is a movement towards moving forward, and maybe we're, particularly we're inside of Health and Human Services, but certainly the new child welfare re-engineering project is really very cutting edge and changing the face, and Department of Technology has been very supportive and very involved in that. So I can only hope that that'll, bleed over to more of us being able to take a different tact rather than those 10-year estimate kinds of things, which were just awful.
One of these books I read says, you think you're going to schedule 10 years out, you're daydreaming.
Yeah.
So,
I'm lucky I can do a schedule one day out, quite frankly.
I think the Department of Technology is going to get a good estimate out of it. That's even a bigger daydream.
Well, and that's the problem, because then you put those things out, and then you're judged on that issue, and then, so much of it is outside of your control. That's why, God, it's great for me to be able to say I was, the project I was first involved in was 3 years, women-led, underfunded, under budget, and on time. It was a massive amount of effort, but if I'd had to go down the waterfall path on that, or I never would have, and still probably would be, going today.
You manage your Agile project through change requests.
Right.
So stage 1 has the business goals and objectives, right? So my struggle is with stage 2, and our oversight has been very nice. I mean, we don't, they're working with us. I understand that the stage gate process is still new, and I know that they're going to be iterative on that, but that's when it's calling for all the project artifacts, right? And in Agile, the documentation is last, but if we're putting those project artifacts in there up front, like you said, a 10-year or 3-year or whatever, is that the answer is change orders, change requests? I mean, because especially if you're on a tight time frame, that's a legislative mandate, for instance, something like that, and you have to file an SPR because you're 10% over in some direction, and everything has to stop until it gets approved and moved forward. It's counterproductive to take that approach. So. How do you chunk that down, I guess, is what I was trying to get at, and I think John was also trying to get at, without having that SPR, without having something coming to bite you. Like, what has your experience been with working with the control agencies to get your project artifacts to be a little more flexible? I mean, are the artifacts more flexible because it's not the goals and objectives in stage 1, since they're apparently judging on stage 1 goals and objectives more so than the stage 2?
Well, stage 2 really needs to be your project planning, right? And getting ready to do your procurement and setting that up. I honestly, I think that, like Alisha said, technology is very supportive of this new methodology. They're very supportive of Agile, both in development and in procurement, but we're still figuring that out. So my advice to you would be to work with your oversight person and make a proposal. I mean, I've done that before, especially under those legislative mandates, in timeframes that you just don't have time to do those great big huge documents that get reviewed by everybody and their brother. So you have to make a deal, and you have to do it for the situation that you're in. But I think as more and more, and I've heard at least 4 departments here who are moving to Agile, as that happens more and more, I think we're going to see technology changing their processes.
And I think the problem sometimes is, at all of the upper executive level, sometimes, they're very much still stuck kind of in the historical and where things have been. And so, as I think I said earlier, I've, had to manage up myself, in terms of our control agency, in terms of having a conversation where the expectations and the thinking is really much buried in the past and the failures of the past and fear about that risk and that notoriety. Quite honestly, in my confirmation hearings, that came up, in terms of, a legislator asking me, about my opinion on that and where did I stand on those kinds of issues. So, I'm certainly aware, and so moving that, because they're not as close to it as some of us are. I've probably drunk the Kool-Aid, but not everybody has done that. And so I think part of our goal in projects, in summits like this or in other conversations, is trying to figure out also how do we, as a collaborative, help educate them. So part of that process is helping them figure out and showing them examples of things that really have worked, and that, it can be much more productive, much more successful, which is what they really want. So it's what's in it for them, what's more successful for your agency secretary or your head your department head, than to have a real success that they can point to and say, wow, this is mine. I can put that on my vitae or whatever. That's what's in it for them. And so I think helping them get to that is part of all of our responsibility as a collective. But it's an effort. It is, because they're coming from a different perspective.
So I think we have time for just about one more question here, and then I think we'll wrap things up. So, okay. So any other questions from other folks? Okay. So.
Well, I want to give answer to this gentleman who asked question. There were a few questions in his question. One of the question was, how do we bring the change, or how do we bring the transformation? So as an Agile coach, you look at the transformation metrics where you have embraced agility, sustained agility, and continuous improvement on agility. And then you have, like you said, you have individuals, teams, organization, and leadership, right? So you have to go through all 4 and hitting all the marks. Now, how you do it is different. And when I say continuous improvement, that is like 1 year later, you go to scaled Agile, or you go to something else. That's continuous improvement, right? So you have to have that structured matrix, how you're going to bring Agile to the department or organization, because I have seen a lot of companies have a failed Agile project because teams have adopted agility, individuals are doing good, but when it comes to Agile means flexible. So when you're changing scope, now you have to go through finance and you have to go through different departments. They are not Agile, they are going through their own cycles. That's where things fall. So that is bringing organizational leadership agility to them.
Excellent, excellent. And I like to tell people I can make Agile teams go as slow as you like. So thank you very much, folks. First, I'd like to thank our panelists who have been absolutely fabulous. Thank you, guys. And I'd also like to thank you guys as an audience. You answered questions I didn't have the answer to. You brought something to this that I didn't expect, and so that was absolutely perfect. So give yourselves a hand as well. Have a great afternoon. Have a great rest of your conference, and we're around if you want to talk.